good morning, good evening, whatever time you're tuning in. Welcome to the latest episode of A Day with Dre, hosted by yours truly, Dre. As usual, I'm going to talk about some things, both heavy and light, sometimes controversial, sometimes silly, but just trust the process. Again, none of this is for you to agree with me. I just give my take on some of the stuff that's happening around the country. But before we get into today's episode, please make sure you like, share, subscribe to this podcast. Again, that's available on all platforms. You can find clips or shorts on TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, anywhere you get your media. There will be a Day with Dre on there. That would be greatly appreciated. That helps this thing grow. There's been some nice growth lately, and I want to take the time to thank all of you for taking your time to share, like, subscribe, and all of that stuff. It definitely increases motivation to do this more regularly. But also, again, before we get started, I want to address the elephant in the room. There was like a month-long hiatus. I was preparing for my board examinations, so I decided to pause on everything that wasn't dedicated to studying. But again, before we get into it, please just like, subscribe, share, anything related to A Day with Dre. That would be greatly appreciated. And if you do that, maybe I'll send you something related to A Day with Dre. So, not that I have, my own little fan club out there or anything, but just to show some appreciation for you taking the time to listen and share with others what I have to say. But like I said, I spent my September studying. How was yours? Of course, September, around here, and when I say around here, I mean stateside, was mundane and uneventful. And if you only listen, I threw up some air quotes with that because September was a bit ridiculous. September was insane. On the literal first day of the month, there was some international association that confirmed what a lot of people had already been assuming. There's a genocide of Palestinians happening. Not to say that others aren't important, but we kind of talk about things that are happening in popular American culture. And although Israel or Palestine aren't inherently American, genocide anywhere is just wrong. So basically free those people. I don't have much to say outside of that. Stop denying it. Stop blaming it on other stuff. Stop killing people. It's really just that straightforward. Stop killing unarmed men, women, and children. When you're fighting people that aren't a military, you're probably doing something wrong. I don't think that's controversial. But the fact that that is controversial, the fact that you can get away with saying, well, someone from Hamas is in that building, so let's blow up that entire hospital. And people will just be like, well, they have a point, the hospital had to go. Doesn't matter that it's full of injured kids, whatever. I'm not even going to get off on that tangent. But yes, it was confirmed or agreed upon by an international association that there is in fact a genocide happening in Palestine. And then that kicks off the month. And then we blow up a boat that's carrying drugs in international waters, which I'm not here to say like you can't, the prosecuting, then we blow up a boat in international waters. And I'm not here to stand up for any narco terrorism or narco terrorists or, drug dealers or anything like that. But blowing up a boat in international waters is kind of, you're going out of your way to do something like that. So that if someone did that to a boat carrying Americans, even if the Americans were doing something they had no business doing, if they were doing something illegal, they'd probably face some stark consequences if they did that. So, that's just a pretty aggressive act. Also here stateside in September at a Hyundai plant in Georgia, I believe it was, there were like 500 people deported and like 300 were sent to South Korea. And they were of Korean origin, but like that's just, everyone hears ICE and they think of Hispanic, Latino people, but it's more than that. And even if it doesn't matter who you think of, like the whole ICE thing is just it's kind of crazy. Like the idea of being like, we want people to come here like legally, I guess in theory makes sense. The execution of how to handle that has just been crazy. It's just like they're, for lack of better terms, they're like, putting out a candle with a fire hose, right? It's just completely been blown out of proportion. It's like anybody that even possibly looks like they fit, the image, quote unquote, of what an illegal immigrant looks like is just getting detained and then possibly deported. And then they'll figure out later, maybe. So for some people, they just get stuck in other places, but they'll detain you and then they'll figure out, oh, actually, we got the wrong person. And we'll get 50 wrong people, but for the 10 people that are actually here illegally, that makes it worth it. I don't know. It's kind of wild. Kind of. Also, more countries are recognizing Palestine as its own sovereign state instead of just like a random territory. And if it's a sovereign state or other countries are recognizing it as a sovereign state, then ceasefires being broken constantly become acts of war on top of it being considered a genocide. So I don't know. I hope and pray that like a lot of these conflicts can just be done, because there's really nothing good that comes out of people dying. Even if people like, I feel like for the most part, there are some wars where maybe even the soldiers are also just as brainwashed as the people sending to war. But a lot of the time, it's like people that aren't ever going to put boots on the ground making decisions that end up in deaths of a lot of people that are just following orders. And yeah, you could argue like, well, don't follow orders if you're like, if someone corrupt tells you to do something, then don't do it. But unfortunately, life is sometimes just not that straightforward. But I'm hoping that we're getting closer to a point where you don't have to wake up and hear this hospital's been blown up, this school's been blown up, seeing pictures of like starving children and stuff like that. Because this conflict, the people that are paying for it the most aren't involved. Those women and children had nothing to do with like the whatever terrorist attack or whatever they want to call it that happened in Israel, but they're the ones paying for it more than anybody. So I just hope that we can get to a point where that stuff is done. Also, randomly, AOL finally discontinued dial-up internet in September. Didn't even know that was still a thing. If you hear that and you don't know what dial-up internet is, then you're too young to listen to this anyways. So I'm not even going to explain it to you. But throwback to the times where you couldn't be on the phone and on the internet at the same time. Shout out to dial-up internet. And then, of course, last but not least, and most notably what happened in September, was the death of Mr. Kirk. And I don't say most notably because like that impacted me individually, but I think that just as far as like US pop culture, right? That just sent a shockwave across the US pop culture wise. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And to cap off the end of the month of September, excuse me, and to cap off the end of the month of September, ICE came out in full force in Chicago, and they're still there, causing a bunch of havoc. And now the government shut down, but they're still getting paid to not work. Don't worry. They send people to war, send our money everywhere else, and then don't get anything done that benefits us, still get paid. But I don't know. Can you go to work and can you stop showing up for work and get paid? I don't know. I can't, but whatever. Politicians are not held to the standard of the people they're supposed to represent. So whatever. But like I said, in terms of newsworthy, like things that happened in the US, the beginning of the month or September was the 10th or 11th when Charlie Kirk got killed. And I'm not going to talk about Charlie Kirk himself too much because I think unless you're new to this podcast, if you've listened to me talk about things before, you know that him and I would have disagreed on a lot of stuff, pretty much everything. But I will say there was something like I did agree with his opinions on like the core of the country is rotten. It's in trouble. We're worse off than our parents. And I agree with him being very passionate about advocating for what you believe in. He had like that quote or whatever that was like, get married, have children, build a legacy, pass down your values and pursue the eternal, which I think on the surface is I think that's like a great thing to live by. Now, where things go sideways is like, obviously I don't agree with him on why the country's in bad shape. Like, I don't agree with the legacy that he built for himself, but like that's the beauty of a free country is that you can not agree with people and still be in the same space. Obviously, someone didn't agree with him to the extent that they thought he was better off being unalived. So with that being said, again, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time being like, I don't like him for this. I don't like him for that. I don't really put a lot of my time and energy in people that say things that don't impact my life because he was a talking head, but he didn't make policy. Do I agree with things he advocated for in policy? No, but he wasn't a policymaker. Therefore, I did not really follow very much of what he says, but he was very popular. and he had some controversial opinions and some that I was like, all right, like I don't mess with this. He had very divisive views on the Civil Rights Act of 64, calls it a mistake. People like in his camp will point to how, like, for example, they'll say, like, well, before the Civil Rights Act, Black people had more two-parent households. Black people had higher home ownership. Therefore, Civil Rights Act was worse for Black people because once they got free and equal should be like have air quotes around it, their family unit broke down more. They started committing more crime, stuff like that. And if you just look at it on a superficial level, like, yeah, sure, that's all true. But again, it's never that black and white. You have to investigate those things. So whatever. I thought that was like a weak argument. Very critical of Martin Luther King Jr., calling him a Marxist and all that kind of stuff, which, yeah, like if you look back on MLK, he definitely had some very socialist Marxist vibes. Cool. I don't know how wanting people to be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, and wanting, labor unions and stuff like that. Like if that's bad, then I guess I'm horrible then. And then whatever the COVID stuff, everyone was in on the misinformation of that, so whatever. But I think the most dangerous thing is the support of what they call the Great Replacement conspiracy theory. And that's really like the thing that I want to take my time to talk about is the Great Replacement theory. It's considered a white nationalist and sometimes anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. I don't know if Kirk was in the anti-Semitic part, but he definitely was in more of the white nationalist mindset. I'm not saying he is or was a white nationalist, but he had some viewpoints that aligned with white nationalism. That the replacement theory is this idea that there's an intentional plan to replace white populations with non-white immigrants. Now, is that happening in real time in the US? Are non-white populations increasing in comparison to the white population? Yes. Is this some type of intentional thing happening behind the scenes by a bunch of people where they're somehow keeping white people from reproducing, but then flooding in a bunch of other people? I think that's insane because this country is controlled by white people. So why would they let that happen on purpose? Why would they intentionally let that happen? You have people that, whatever, right? Just think about that. White people run the country. They run the country, and you think that they are trying to eliminate themselves or exterminate themselves. Like, just make it make sense. Now, the more realistic thing is, and this is not supposed to turn into some anti-capitalism thing, but a lot of people of color are used to struggling. So the fact that the economy is hard, things cost a lot, is not preventing people that have traditionally always been second tier or in a struggling position. They're still going to have kids. They're still going to raise their families because this is how it's always been for them. But now that economic pressure is hitting white people, which not that they haven't experienced economic pressure before, but it's hitting them harder as a group of people than it has maybe since the early 1900s. When you can't afford childcare, when you can't afford groceries, etc., and that's been going on for who knows how long, when you can't buy a home, when school costs a ton, the pressure to, or the yearning to start a family goes down because all of a sudden these people are experiencing some type of financial anxiety that they maybe as a group of people have not experienced as strongly. And when you have uncertainty about how your future is going to look, a lot of the time you don't want to, produce more people. But when other people that are just perpetually in that situation aren't like all of a sudden shell shocked by facing financial hardships and they just keep having kids, it might look like they're having kids at a much higher rate, but it's not because of some like boogeyman in the shadows that's trying to replace white people. What's making the percentage of white people go down is the fact that our country is just kind of falling apart at the seams. Other people that have just always been struggling are just like, whatever, we're just going to keep struggling and keep having kids. And people that aren't used to struggling are just like, why would I bring more kids into this world if daycare is $1,500 a month part-time and I only make $4,000 a month? And most people don't even make $4,000 a month after taxes. Like that, it's just, again, if you just look at percentages and say that it's going down, then yeah, it looks like white people are being replaced. But if you don't actually critically think about what numbers are saying, then you just kind of have an ignorant response. But what I can tell you is that in important positions, white people are not being replaced. They're still the overwhelming majority of pretty much every important position or desirable job that exists. You think because you see a few politicians of color or you saw a black president that there's, a mass replacement of white people. The media, what you're seeing in the media is making you think that. Look at who holds all the wealth. White people have more wealth compared to everyone else than pretty much ever in the US. So, like, again, don't just look outside or look at the TV and be like, yo, yeah, this is what's happening. Like, actually do some research. I didn't mean to go off on a whole soliloquy on the great replacement theory, but I think one of the craziest things that happened with the death of Charlie Kirk, and I say all of that to say this, political violence, like, isn't, like, I don't want to say it's never okay in the sense of assassinating people like that. Like, that's obviously that's wrong, but political violence is really just any time someone's hurt to like send a political message. And sometimes it's been necessary, like not in assassinating people, but like a war is political violence. And sometimes wars are necessary. The Civil War needed to happen, but shooting people that have podcasts and TV shows, like what are we doing? Because that didn't change anything. That, again, in the grand scheme of things, like if you disagree, you can't just shoot someone because you disagree with what they say, no matter how vile they are. Now, should that person be saying those things? Like, obviously it depends on if you agree with them or not, but like like that, I don't want anybody to hear this and be like, I condone what happened. And obviously that person's going to be tried, and like they will have their day in court, and that'll happen. But interestingly enough, the fallout from what happened. So a lot of people have opinions that are towards Mr. Kirk that were a lot stronger than what I've said. And again, I will simply say I disagree with the things he said. I'm not going to start going on a tangent of, and some people did do that, but the blowback that people were getting, the amount of jobs that were lost on people, the amount of, like the fallout was wild. And it started this conversation about political violence. And then you started having these people saying the left is so violent, you're not safe around the left. So as usual, I want to bring receipts. All right. Since 2020, and I'll post links to where I get these things. And this is from a fact check. That's not, it's just posting stats. It's not an opinion. Since 2020, right-wing ideology has been the leading cause of political murders, accounting for 54%, with left-wing ideology accounting for 22%, and then Islamic ideology as 21%. All right? So that's since 2020. All right? Now, if you're going to be like, well, since September of 2025, right, sure, you want to stratify it like that. But like, I think we're already forgetting that the Democratic governor of Pennsylvania had his house set on fire. He didn't die, but that's political violence. And also, the Speaker of the House for the state of Minnesota was killed with her husband and her dog. Like, that's political violence. That's a literal politician being murdered for being a politician. And again, none of it is, I don't want to get into like a pain Olympics here. It's not worse one way. Like, it's not worse on the left. Are they louder about stuff online? Absolutely. The left is definitely more chronically online, especially if you can filter out like the millions of bots that are online. Yes, the left is more chronically online in general. 2024 National Institute of Justice report found the number of far-right attacks continues to outpace all other types of terrorism and domestic violent extremism. And then, of course, on September 12th, this past month, the links to these studies all of a sudden were removed from online, which is a whole nother issue, because that's basically the government is saying, we want to put out this narrative, and all the evidence that we had that goes against this narrative, we are getting rid of it. So we want to say the left is more violent. There was evidence that was published by the government that didn't fit that narrative. So now we're going to remove that evidence so we can just say this. And then hopefully you hear that and don't try to fact check it yourself, which is, I mean, that's insane that that just happens in real time. Like, we want to talk about like Russian propaganda, North Korean propaganda, Chinese propaganda, but like, what is that? Again, it's crazy. Since 2017, supremacists have been the most lethal threat of domestic terror in the United States. All right, like, and but the president wants to do something about Antifa. That's not even real. Antifa is not. It's not even a real organization. It just means anti-fascist. And yes, there are a lot of people that are anti-fascist, but there's no Antifa headquarters. There's no secret Antifa clubs. Like, it's not like the Klan where there's like a literal organization, just a statement, and then someone at some point made it like an LLC or something like that to try to capitalize off of it, because of course, like, you try to capitalize off of everything in the States, but whatever, neither here nor there. And then since like, political violence committed over the last like 70 years, 90% of it were male, and then the overwhelming majority of that were conservative minded white males. So there are people in there with left wing ideology. It's just not at nearly the same rate. So again, and I will post the receipts for this because I was actually shocked how slanted this data was. But what comes out of this, like, the crazy thing is, like, everyone, when we talk about our Bill of Rights and we're like, freedom of press, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and people don't know what any of those things mean, especially with freedom of speech, because freedom of speech means that you're supposed to be able to say things and not be punished by your government. And after Charlie Kirk died, I would argue that freedom of speech was infringed on greatly, because you had people that were members of the government and they were basically pressuring people from a government position to fire people, to suspend people, to, they were pressuring people or jobs to basically to silence the dissenters. Now, should people be celebrating and, posting laughing emojis to a video of someone being shot in the neck? No. If your job decides to fire you for that because it doesn't agree with their viewpoints, valid. But for sitting politicians to say, you need to get rid of this person because of this, that's a straight up violation of your constitutional rights. Do I think that people of power should be able to see, should whatever? That's neither here nor there. The reality is, them saying fire someone for saying this, fire someone for doing something I don't agree with, is a direct violation of your constitutional rights. I mean, what was it, Jimmy Kimmel? There was no like direct, like, the president's office saying get his show off the air, but it was alleged off the record pressure, and maybe it's come out since then that there was like some on the record thing to have that dealt with. Like, again, maybe not the president himself, but any government position. Like, you're not supposed to use your position in the government to make people make decisions like that. And also, the people, like, I thought the whole thing about like cancel culture was supposed to be a left thing, and anyone that was saying stuff about that assassination on the internet, you had people doxing people and saying, oh, you work here, you deserve to lose your job. And again, that's like the definition of being canceled. Like, you're trying to get someone's job taken for making jokes about someone online. So I think it's just funny how there's a double standard with that, because you can get on, again, Charlie Kirk is not a politician. He's a public figure. And you can get online and see, like, for example, people every year will say 5 years sober for George Floyd, or insert like whatever witty comment they want to make like that, or I can breathe now, like George Floyd, and like stuff like that. And again, it's not a pain Olympics, because like neither of those people should have died, but when one's okay and the other one's not, then there's obviously a certain bias, when in reality, you should just say that these people making fun of dead people are dark. And then if you don't like it, you look the other way. But like calling and trying to get people's like jobs taken away and stuff like that for idiotic stuff said online is just, I don't know. It's just a bit much. Like, I don't know. Everyone's a little hypocritical, but like, this shit is just out of hand. Like we're manipulating data, we're just blatantly being hypocritical towards each other. Like, and it's so absurd. It's like how it's almost like if you step back and look at it, it's just almost like, how is this even possible to be this slanted in your way of thinking? Like, how are we so radicalized? How, like, it's just mind boggling. And then you get caught in these echo chambers and it just makes you even crazier. And it's like, how it almost makes you wonder how people can function at all because we're so slanted and so like polarized against each other. And it's, again, how, when is it going to change? Because like you can go online right now and go to a federal government website, and instead of it just being like government's closed, we're working on something to try to fix this, it'll just say the Democrats' fault that the government shut down. And it's like, how do we get to this point where like, but then again, it's just a reflection of a person that's in the Oval Office. That's where we'll wrap up today, right? It was a short one, but a necessary one. And again, let's take a step back and like try to just be normal for one day. And I don't know, maybe things will start to get better. All right. Thank you. Have a good night.